Everyone. I'm excited to bring you this presentation. I've been working on it for a while now, and I've really come across some things that I found to be interesting. I titled my presentation, Who's the Real Criminal? And I started off by looking at historical crimes and the media's representation of the criminals, and were there any stories where the criminals were presented as heroes, kind of like a Robin Hood like figure? Was there something that people could do, even as a criminal, that restored their image in the public or made them to look like a good guy? And I did come across some people that I think fit that role. They were different than who I initially considered, because after reevaluating, I figured that the bad acts they did still outweighed the good acts they did. And I'll touch on that later on. But another reason this really interested me is from the perspective of a rapper. Being in a culture where crime can sometimes be seen as good and credible for having committed crimes, and having a criminal record can sometimes earn someone respect. I thought that would be interesting to tie into this as well, because at what point do you respect someone because they've did something? My opinion on that is you respect someone if they change. If they did something and they show a lot of honor, integrity with their word, and they're a go-getter and they work hard. I think that is where you can respect someone regardless of their past. Now, there's some things that someone may have done where you would never trust them again, and that's totally respectable, and that's just what you have to do to protect yourself sometimes, is not tolerate that, because every situation's different. Some criminals completely reform, never do crime again. Some seem like they've reformed, and they burn someone pretty bad. So, getting into the presentation, how have some criminals been seen as favorable to their community? So, criminals are usually seen as bad guys by society. However, there are some communities where the criminals provided more than their own governments did to the people. With this slide in mind, I was thinking of Pablo Escobar, and during time of his reign in Colombia, he provided soccer fields and housing to citizens. A lot of this for children and single mothers that were struggling, and people in poverty in general. And that's tremendous. And I'll go ahead and speak there. This was who I had in mind that I initially thought could maybe be seen as a hero. But considering all the people that were affected from his crime and his syndicate, I don't think that these acts redeem him from being what we would consider criminal. And also defining criminal, this was an assignment that we had early on, choosing some words, and criminal is one that I looked at. A criminal is someone who goes against ethics and is found by the law to be criminal, or mutually agreed upon that they're doing something wrong, because the law does not always bring justice. So that doesn't stop people from being a criminal just because the law doesn't find them, and vice versa. Just because the law says someone is a criminal does not mean they are a criminal. Most of the time it does, but there are exceptions to this. And another one I wanted to touch base on is Al Capone. And he would commonly provide turkeys every Thanksgiving and I believe Christmas time to his community. So he was feeding a lot of people. Now, does this restore his image and his character? That's for people to decide, because you can debate if all these criminal acts are on people that are other criminal organizations. So if all the murders are other criminals and no civilians are harmed, and they're giving back to the community, this is someone that I would consider a hero. However, that's not exactly the case. Usually bystanders are hurt or people's family members are threatened, and that is where we would still consider someone a criminal regardless of their good acts for the community. And keep in mind, criminals will do these good acts to attempt to restore their image. These criminals are really smart. They don't go several years or decades breaking the law, making a lot of money without having a good plan and being able to get away from that. So, on to the next slide. Access to media. So, again, in my intro, I stated that how the media displays people and criminals is very important to my topic. And when researching, well, I found that different browsers gave me different results. And I had some prior experience on this, and I'll touch later. I have a slide coming up about that. But this is important because statistics are all coming from the web. They're all coming from the internet. And I take statistics, even if it's a peer-reviewed article, I don't know that it's right. That's where we've gotten to in our society, is I don't know what's true. If I don't see it myself, I can't say that it's true, even if someone else peer-reviews it. Whether that be the president says it's true, a scientist says it's true, an athlete says it's true. If I don't see it for myself, I can't say it's true. So access to media. This is important as well, because if I was doing this project 30 years ago, my access to media would be much smaller. Right now it's at my fingertips and it's really infinite. Now, say it were a longer time ago and my access to media could be more reputable, perhaps, depending on the authors of the books or the sources, would be harder for anyone to just make a website and put the information they wish, because it was a more restricted market when it came to reputable sources. So going back into heroes, these were some people that stood out amongst my research. So the first two I'm actually going to come back to. Al Capone, we spoke on him a little bit, and Frank Sinatra is a similar situation tied in with the mafia, but a very likable guy. Even the Christmas songs we hear today are written or covered by Frank Sinatra, many of them. Maybe they were written by someone else, but like all Christmas music, other people sing it, and Frank Sinatra perhaps would fit that criminal hero role. Now, maybe what he did in his criminal life was not as bad or violent, or maybe we don't know. Maybe that's not in the media, it's not written anywhere. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist. Pablo Escobar, we spoke earlier on him, and this is an international one. It's debatable, but like I spoke on my opinion of it, there were people that are involved and bystanders that are hurt. There was a plane bombing at one point during his reign, and I think you could say alone that would be enough to record him as an infamous criminal, unrestorable, because all the people that were innocent, not caring about bystanders just to get your business done, is very evil. That's pretty evil. Now, why I'm coming back to Edward Snowden and Julian Assange is this is the field where I found that criminals can be heroes, and these are hackers is what I would refer to them, or whistleblowers, data leakers. They gave information to the public that the public wasn't supposed to have, and according to who? The government. They were not supposed to have this because it was secret. Edward Snowden, to this day, he's not allowed back in the United States. He leaked information regarding how much technology, spyware that the government had, letting everybody know that they can listen to your phones. They have programs that automatically filter when certain words are typed. You see, like if you made a threat on a president in a text message or posting on social media, you may have Secret Service people coming to your house, and that is because of the spyware that the government has. Big Brother. Now, Julian Assange established WikiLeaks, which was a platform for whistleblowers to give information, to whistleblow. And the idea of this was the whistleblowers would be protected, it was encrypted, and it wouldn't be tracked back to them. Because that's the biggest fear of a whistleblower, and why many people don't call someone out or report something is they're scared of losing their lives or their family's lives. So Julian Assange is the same deal, and I believe he is residing in Australia right now. Edward Snowden residing in Russia. And that's interesting, Russia, because how our media presents Russia is bad guys. That's all my life I've grown up hearing that, kind of subconsciously being taught that. The video games that I've played always has Russians are a common enemy. Russians against the US and also the Chinese. So these two, Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, they risked their lives and their careers, in the case of Edward Snowden, to help us to give this information to the public because they thought it was ethically wrong. So they did it for ethics. And I would consider these people heroes. And how the media portrays them, well, that's going to be very different based on whatever source you have. And at some point, you need to look at the facts, what did happen, and make your own opinion, which sometimes is hard when an article is written to establish one thing. And that's most media, probably 95%, 98% of media. There's a point, there's a focus, there's a perception that the media is trying to spin. So, on to hidden criminals. In some cases, it's the people that are setting the laws that are criminals. Kind of how I spoke, these whistleblowers, Edward Snowden, was letting people know what the government was doing. Criminals hidden by bribes and government protection are the most dangerous because there exists little to no enforcement to hold them accountable. They are at the top. So, a current situation in the past few years, it seemed very evident that our government has been involved in some shady business, a lot doing with sending money to countries, especially Ukraine, and then looking at the family ties here, Hunter Biden being on the Burisma Energy Board for a period of time there, and some whistleblowers, people being murdered, which we will also talk about on the next slide, and how that is covered up. And hidden criminals, well, these are people that we don't know their names, and these are the ones that are calling the shots. These would be the people on the board for JP Morgan and creating laws, getting money to create certain laws. A good example here, I bring up JP Morgan because several years ago in 2021, I believe, they had a cargo ship that was seized carrying over $1 billion worth of cocaine. So this surprised me, and I was so glad to learn about it because it was not in the mainstream media. And every person I've told this to never heard about it. And you can still find it. You can still find the reports looking it up. So it's not completely hidden. But it's amazing how they can keep the media and press from releasing such a compelling, big breaking story. So many people have money invested with JP Morgan or Chase Bank, and they're involved in illegal business, criminal business, and drug smuggling. And that's where a lot of drug smuggling comes through, is these hidden criminals, which are part of the government, and they're either accepting bribes or maybe they're threatened. And Southern California is a good example where politicians and people in charge there are either scared of the cartel or they're getting paid by the cartel, likely both. And because of that, that area of the country is suffering, and there's a lot of drugs coming in and homeless and human trafficking, a lot of guns, even in a state where guns aren't very much accepted. So that's interesting there, I found. And talking about this some more. So when I mentioned the whistleblowers, well, I had previous experience with this, and it came back to light doing this project. But certain web browsers will not provide you certain articles. For example, most of the default browsers, Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, Safari, are very regulated with what they show. DuckDuckGo is a browser that, at least in the past, it had more freedom with it. I don't believe that there's any free, uncensored platform like that. I don't think that exists. Now, with DuckDuckGo, this was very interesting, and I had a recent experience with this in regards to the topic of Ukrainian whistleblowers. So, there was a whistleblower with the Burisma Energy Corps whom was killed, whom died. And shortly after him dying, his wife also died. And it's the case of suspicious but acceptable circumstances, being car crashes. And why I wanted to bring this up, well, when you search something and you don't get a story on all the other web browsers, but it will come up on a certain web browser, it shows you how heavily monitored these browsers are. So this story, why I mentioned it, is because it would not come up on Safari, Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, etc. There were completely different stories regarding the whistleblowers. So another big example of this, and right now we're talking about media government, and the government controlling the media and what you think. So a big recent one, which I talked about in my essay, and this came up within the last week, is the Brian Thompson United Healthcare shooting. And the propaganda in this was very heavy. When I saw the clip initially, it was very evident that this is a hitman, a hired person for the murder. And why is it very obvious? Well, for one, he has a suppressor, and people familiar with firearms know how difficult it is to get a suppressor, and they also probably don't know a single person that has a suppressor. Secondary, the composure of the shooter in this. And as an experienced firearms user, you know this person has practice. Even if they hadn't killed someone before, they are very comfortable with the weapon they are using and very reliable in their equipment, which is a military trait, is to learn to be reliable in your equipment. Now, who the murderer is, we will never know, and the fact of them leaving a cell phone to confuse police, very good, very well executed, such high level, could not be a civilian. Instantly, propaganda goes that it's someone who could be unhappy with not getting a claim or fed up with so-and-so, and recently claiming that it was a 26-year-old kid that did this. Very unlikely to impossible. And this is a case of the media preying on people that aren't experienced with firearms, which they do oftentimes. Their instant go-to is, this would have never happened if firearms weren't allowed. And people that don't use firearms in their life may agree with this because firearms don't have any place to them. Another big one is COVID-19, false information. A lot of you may have seen this during the COVID-19 period, especially on Instagram and Facebook, which were both Meta at the time and currently are, where if you had a certain word in your post, it may get taken down or hidden due to false information. Now, we don't need to revisit this much, but we know that people were forced to get the vaccine, even though some doctors said it was not good, it would pose a health risk. Now, I can vouch for this one personally because I had a seizure from my COVID-19 vaccine. I was forced to get it for a school program studying abroad, which initially the program had told me that I would not need this vaccine because I had raised my concern early in the process, May to June. Now come August, just several weeks before my departure, it was mandated that all students have the vaccine, and I had already made my deposit, got my passport. Now, I attempted to apply for an exemption from this vaccine, as my doctor was very much against it, and he wrote me an exemption. My exemption was denied, and I was forced to get the vaccine to continue the program. I got the vaccine, and within 2 minutes, I was on the floor having a seizure, and I woke up on the floor, sweating, after having a seizure, and I was taken to the hospital, where nothing was wrong with me. This is a personal subject, very much so, but I think a good example of a lot of the time false information was given was when people posted anti-COVID-19. And obviously there were side effects, and I can say that as a primary source who had a seizure as a 19-year-old male in great health, had a seizure from the COVID-19 vaccine. So, going back to being an artist, famous rapper, crime and art, music, and recreation. So, a lot of movies, TV shows, video games, music, they all include a violent setting or a violent category, whether it be war games, some type of shooter games, aggressive rap music, rock music, TV shows that regard gangs, criminals, and the same with movies. So, do these influence people? I would say yes. Is it positive or negative? That's a good question. I think it's positive in the shape that it can educate people. For example, documentaries on crime lords or crime mafias, crime organizations, or murder cases, such as an event that happened. I think it's absolutely positive that it can educate people. Now, by that same token, it can be negative if it has a certain message that is not good or is planting a seed of propaganda in people or trying to make people think a certain way that's not correct. And that's really hard to determine what's correct and what's not, because a lot of it is opinion. A lot of it you have to base an opinion because not all the facts are presented to you. Also, in terms of shooter games, I think these are positive because a lot of young men and men in general, they absorb this entertainment and it's a release for them. It's a masculine trait to have a killer instinct. That's why people use the phrase, I made a killing, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. People like to hunt, for example. These are all a killer instinct, which is natural masculine trait. Another example of this being a masculine trait is a man and a woman are on the couch and they see a spider. It would be considered normal for the woman to freak out. Now, if the man freaked out and didn't get up and kill the spider, that would be very weird, and his woman probably wouldn't respect him. That is my example for the killer instinct and how this violence and this crime in media can be an outing for people so that they don't actually partake in crime. Okay? Does it make an audience numb? This was something I thought about, and it probably does to an extent. We see a lot of murders and things on TV all the time, crimes and people getting beat and all this, and we're used to it. We accept it as a part of society. I don't think it needs to be on all the time, but that's what the news does. You can't control what they do. The only thing you can control is how much you consume. And that is my finding for this, is a lot of people consume more media than they should. People aren't producing or creating for themselves. They go to school and it's instilled in them to get a job so that they can go to Walmart and Kroger to buy their foods and their clothes. People aren't taught to be producers, and I think people need to be producers, whether that be looking in and doing their own research and making a video or a podcast or a documentary, or having a garden at home and growing more food, or maybe trying to hunt a deer or a turkey every year for some extra meat. People are not involved in what they consume. Their hands are off and it's made for them. That's the summary of my presentation. And thank you for listening if you listened this far. I do think some criminals are heroes. And where that line is drawn is, are they hurting anyone? Are they breaking ethics? And also, ethics is different for each person. Someone might think that Edward Snowden releasing that information is unethical. And that would be then up to that person. I don't know if they would still consider him a hero. I would, and I would consider what he did ethical. Thank you. I love doing this project. Peace out.